This is why the Living Method works so well for men.
This is for you. This is the most important one for you guys.
And for all the perimenopausal, menopausal, and postmenopausal women.
Your hormones are your friends. Create the life that you want to and deserve to live.
That's doable. That is doable. Today, we are talking hormones and weight loss, or weight loss and hormones, specifically when it comes to stress and sleep. How is that affecting your weight loss journey? And here to have the perfect conversation with me is the hormone queen, Dr. Olinca Trejo.
I am a naturopathic doctor. I have been in practice for 15 years, and my clinical focus has always been hormones. I fell in love with them, and I became fascinated with all of these beautiful chemical messengers that pretty much rule our body.
Today, we are going to keep it specific to weight loss, stress, and sleep. Is the conversation any different for men than it is for women when it comes to the conversation today?
100% no. I think that this is a misconception. I think that people, when we say hormones, the first thing that people think about is like, oh, estrogen, testosterone. In men have estrogen also, right? Women also have testosterone, just in varying degrees. That's actually what gives us sexual characteristics. But all of the other hormones that we're going to talk about, we all have in the exact same way. And sleep actually impacts our testosterone or estrogen or progesterone very similarly if you're male or female. It's just that obviously because males have more testosterone, that piece of it is going to be more significantly impacted, but sleep impacts us the exact same way. Our risk factors as a result of reduced sleep is also very similar. And so I know that sometimes men who are following the program, sometimes when they hear hormones are like, oh yeah, this is not for me. This is for you. Stay for this one. This is the most important one for you guys because you're the worst at sleeping sometimes.
And for all the perimenopausal, menopausal, and postmenopausal women, Dr. Olinca gave us some great talks in the menopause add-on. So if you have access to that, make sure you go in there and listen to those conversations because you have a more robust conversation, obviously, about hormones and menopause.
Hormones are chemical messengers that come from one place of your body to tell a different part of your body to do something specific. They all work in almost like a key and lock system where the receptor is the lock and the hormone is the key. And there's only legitimately one key that fits into the one lock and opens it or closes it. That is the simplest thing. Changes in your brain and in your body when you decide not to sleep or sleep too little that will lead you down a path of typically overeating and as a consequence, like gain weight, right? And that's actually because of the importance that sleep plays in rebalancing that really intricate balance that actually happens with all of these chemical messengers. Because almost when you sleep, there's almost like a reset button that happens. Humans are legitimately the only species in the world that will choose not to sleep. Yeah. And that will choose to delay sleep in the natural and like in our natural habitat. All other animals only reduce their sleep whenever they're in a state of starvation or there's famine across the land, right? And why that happens, it's a survival mechanism that happens because your body feels like, okay, if I keep you awake for a little bit longer, you might actually cover a bigger perimeter to actually get more food, right? And that actually happens to us too. And so what I want you to think about is when I'm not sleeping, just like every other animal out there, my body goes automatically into starvation mode because that is going to be a survival or a compensatory mechanism to try and keep me alive for longer.
Well, this is what I say. Your body's only job in life is to try to keep you alive. It's always repairing and rebuilding and regenerating 100%. And rejuvenating and signaling. Mm-hmm. And this is about getting in tune. And especially this is how people's bodies get used to storing more fat than they need because every time they have starved, gotten to eat less, exercise more, diet, force their body to burn and use fat, the body's like, holy shit. We better store that all back plus more for next time that happens. Look what we did for you. And then it happens again and again and again. And this is why your set point or this becomes this really high because your body feels like, well, basically you've taught it that it needs to store that much fat in order to keep you alive.
Your hormones are your friends. Your hormones are just trying to keep you alive. They're not against you. They just respond to the environment that you've put them in, right? So for example, your hunger hormones. So there's actually now 3 that we've really identified, but the 2 main players are called leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is a hormone that will it actually is produced by your fat stores, and it sends a signal to your brain that says like, you know what, I am full. I have eaten. I am like totally good. And so leptin being high sends a signal to your brain that says, I feel satisfied. I'm not hungry. Ghrelin, on the other hand, it's actually produced by your stomach. And I always say GER like reminds me of like your tummy grumbling.
Yeah.
So that's actually your hunger hormone. And that hormone actually revs up your hunger. When your glucose is low, or, you know, when you're in a state of starvation, usually your ghrelin levels will increase to tell your brain like, no, you need to keep on eating because we need a little bit more food. And it triggers you to eat more. So that's leptin is satisfaction in fullness, and ghrelin is hunger.
And you can actually create leptin resistance by constantly overeating and overeating and overeating more than you need. Your leptin becomes less sensitive.
If they're high all the time, your cells are kind of like meh, like they just stopped listening to this signaling, because it's almost like they're elevated all the time, and there's nothing new. There's no highs, there's no lows. And that actually happens very frequently with leptin and insulin. When you're not sleeping well, or you're not sleeping either enough, or you had a really crappy sleep, usually you eat different the next day, right? Usually your cravings change, all of that stuff. And so the reason actually why that happens, and we have so much research on this, is that whenever we limit people to, usually is like less than 6 hours of sleep, even like less than 5, there's this marked reduction in actually your satiety hormone, the leptin hormone, and it actually reduces by about 20%. And then your hunger hormone actually will increase by about 30%. So it's almost like you end up getting punished twice by doing the same offense. It's not just that when you're underslept, you eat more. You end up choosing different foods, right, than you typically would choose. And so we know that you end up actually choosing heavy hitters. You end up choosing obesogenic, sugary, processed treats. And you also increase your desire for like heavy carbohydrates, like the pastas, the crackers, the breads, the like salty snacks. And that increase in research has actually been shown to be a minimum of about like 20 to about 30 to 40%. Which for the average person, I know it's crazy, it can be up to 400 calories in a day. And I mean, listen, I know that this program, we don't really talk about calories, but a calorie is a calorie, right? And 400 calories, even if that means, you know, just think about like, most of us are underslept usually Monday to Friday. Even if you think of like, okay, I'm underslept 5 days a week for the month, that could be upwards of like 8,000 calories in 1 month that you're eating past your satiety point. That's actually something that we're trying to teach you on this program, because you're not sleeping well, just because of that undersleeping and the impact that it causes on those hormones.
Well, on the other side of that, I know you're going to talk next. Not only are you eating more, but the way your body is processing those foods when you are tired is completely different. It's affecting your brain. You're more likely to choose differently. And it's actually affecting your body and your hunger hormones. And not only that, it's going to affect how your body processes the food. So the choice that you're making, the foods that you are eating, and then what your body chooses to do with those foods when you're not getting sleep.
This isn't about willpower. This is actually about an area in your brain that's called your prefrontal cortex, that whenever you don't sleep, it's almost like this primitive area in your brain that is driving that survival mechanism, right? It drives that excessive appetite because it becomes like hyperactive and hyper responsive. And it's almost like that prefrontal cortex that usually is that executive brain that's like, no, you know, we don't do this. Like we are going to choose our vegetable and that's not going. It's completely shut off because you just haven't slept. And so this isn't like, this is supposed to be, hopefully at the end of this, this is supposed to be actually a very empowering conversation so that you understand there's so many things that you can do. This is not your fault. And this is not because you're lacking willpower. And it's not, you know, that the other diets fail, you know, you failed the other diets, as the other diets failed you because they never talked about these very important components in your lifestyle and how important they are for a successful weight loss journey.
This is already becoming one of my favorite conversations. And you and I have had a lot of conversations, because this is just really to help deepen your awareness of why you are doing it,
100%.
why we are focused on not just what to eat and when, and why we're so stuck about the routine and consistency, and why we're having that conversation with maximizing, because it all factors in to so much more than you just losing your weight, because these are things you need to address in order to maintain and sustain that weight at the end. So love this conversation. Okay.
There's so many things that can play a role in like your hormones. Like for example, sleep. What happens with insulin is that if you actually reduce your sleep to less than about 6 hours for a few days in healthy subjects, the next day you'll have less sensitivity to this hormone, and that sensitivity will decrease by about 30, sometimes even 40%. That's actually enough to impact your blood sugar regulations, and like your blood sugar regulation enough that on a test, it might actually look like you're headed towards diabetes. That's actually how impactful it can be, right? And so insulin you have actually heard of, because insulin can make it really, really, really hard when it's elevated for your body to access those fat stores, right? Because it's a hormone that kind of regulates whether your body is storing carbohydrates or whether it's using it. And so if you go back to the conversation we're just having about 10 minutes ago about, I'm not sleeping well, I'm going to increase my cravings for those sugary, salty, heavy carb snacks. You're eating more of those, but then the hormone that's regulating the use or the storage of that on the other end of that equation is compromised, right? So you're eating more, but then your sensitivity to it is lower. And what's going to happen? You're going to gain weight.
Yeah, your body chooses to store that as fat.
Of course, and then the harder part is that when you're actually storing that fat, you usually, very similarly to stress, you actually end up storing it viscerally, right? Which is going to be around your abdomen. And we know that that fat around your abdomen is also acts like an endocrine organ, which means that it also starts releasing hormones, and it also starts changing your hormones, and it like can work against you. And men, listen up to this, because this is actually really interesting. And this happens to a lot of men that carry weight around their bellies. Their testosterone will decrease if you're not sleeping well. Your testosterone will decrease to about the level of somebody who is 10 years older than you. And what that will happen now, in combination with the insulin and all of the other things that we're talking about, right? Testosterone is, yes, the male hormone that gives you the libido and all the umph to your step, but it's also the hormone that helps you not just build muscle mass, but maintain your muscle mass. And so what happens with that low testosterone, for sure, you can see an impact in your libido and your erectile function and all of that stuff. But then what will also happen is that you actually end up losing so much more of your muscle mass than you would if you were sleeping properly and not carrying that fat around your belly. And then on the other end of that equation, that fat around your belly is going to take the testosterone that you do have and is going to change it into estrogen. And that's why men typically that carry excess weight around their abdomen end up with something that's called gynecomastia, or what we call man boobies, because their breast tissue, their breast tissue will increase as a result of that estrogen, right?
I mean, so I've looked at studies recently that talk about sort of what age obesity or weight issues start in men versus women, and women very early. In men, hardly existent at younger ages, obviously more so now, but especially as they get older, they kind of surpass us in terms of the weight department.
Sure.
And that beer belly, I call the businessman belly, because it is high stress, lack of sleep, long periods of time without eating. And when they do eat, they overeat. That is a recipe for that beer belly without even drinking any beer. And this is why the Living Method works so well for men, because the minute they start just giving their body what it needs, their bodies are less inclined to actually store that fat. I also want to talk about women. When people say, does the Living Method work when it comes to being hormonal and menopause? This is why you're already doing so much to
100%.
address that just by following the program.
When you actually lose the weight, about 60% of the weight that you will lose in that setting will be from muscle mass. 60% will be from muscle mass. And so then the hard thing is that you come out of that diet, right? And you're like, oh my God, I lost 10 pounds. And it's like, yeah, girl, but like 60% of that was muscle mass because you weren't feeding yourself properly, because you weren't eating, because of that. Then you show up to perimenopause, right? When naturally you're aging, naturally because the estrogen is declining, you're losing that muscle mass more rapidly. And you tend to store weight a little bit differently. We're feeding you protein so that you can have that muscle mass, right? We're trying to get you to not undereat so that you feed that muscle mass. It's those small, consistent changes that you can build into your lifestyle that you can take for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades into your life. There's so many little tools that we give you in your toolbox that can allow you to have a beautiful, magical toolbox for the rest of your life to create the life that you want to and deserve to live.
It's not about the intensity, it's about the consistency, and it's about bringing everything that you are doing together. I love that so much. That's doable. That is doable.